So next one up is Tom. Tom is a co-founder of Alley, which was before, had a different connotation, 1 or 2 names before, and so on. And I think you have something really cool you do, which is taking the model, which we all learn here, and some big industry people are involved, and taking it to the rest of the world. So I'm really curious about your talk. Tom from Alley.
Thanks so much, Howard. Great. Hi, everybody. As Howard said, my name is Tom. I'm co-founder of Alley, and I'd like to share our perspective on urban mobility with you guys. And when we talk about the urban sphere, I'd like to remind ourselves of the impact that cities are going to have over the next 15 to 20 years. So what we have here is like a picture of Istanbul, like the biggest city in Europe with 50 million people living in there, like a mega city. And the next billion of people will live in cities rather than the countryside. So over the next 15 years, we will see that cities are going to have even a more tremendous impact that they already have, which comes with a lot of challenges, of course, but I rather see it as opportunities, what technology can do to help these cities with 20, 25 million people living in it to deal with that. So our perspective on urban transport, that's what you guys like to hear from us. And before we go to the vision, I'd like to look at the status quo first. So what we have here is like a car, the S-Klasse from 1985, and the actual model. So while most likely the engineers from Daimler would say it's a completely different product, I feel it's more or less the same product. If you look at the use case, what you actually do with it, You have like a vehicle built of steel with a steering wheel where a driver sits behind, and you put some fuel in it and you drive around it. Most of the times you sit there alone. So I'd say the use case hasn't really changed. Particularly, it hasn't been impacted by any digital technology yet, putting it in simple words. It's still the same. Now, when we look at urban mobility, here in London, we have an example of a bus from 1963 or 65, I guess, and a 2010 kind of model. Not only that, they look very similar. If you look at the use case of taking a bus in a city, what has really changed since '85? And I would say not so much again. You stand at a bus stop, you wait for the bus that is supposed to come every 20 minutes. Sometimes it comes, sometimes it doesn't. So you wait there, and you have to enter it, and you have a set price. It's always like €2.50 that you pay. And then the bus goes along like a static route, which is more or less where you want to go, but not really meeting your demands. So again, I'd say if you look at the use case of public transportation, no impact by the internet, by digital technologies whatsoever in operating public transportation in a city. So we believe this is about to change, and we want to play a role in there. What does it mean? So here we have a couple of buzzwords you might think about: dynamic timetables, about a fluid routing in a city, about journeys that are based on real patterns, optimized passenger flows, and autonomous traffic. So what we see is that if you make it right in terms of technology, that you can have a kind of an on-demand mass transit system, where you put all these things together, have the right technology in place, and that means in the end that it's not you going to a bus stop, waiting there for a bus that might come every 20 minutes and you pay a set price. It's going to be the other way around. You're going to have a dynamic system that adapts in real time to the actual needs of the population in the city. So on-demand, individual transit-wise, that's already something we are getting familiar with. If you look at Car2Go or Uber, these kind of things are nothing else than on-demand individual transit, and we believe this can happen to mass transit too. What might sound as a new idea is in fact something that you more or less already see in emerging markets. So we have a couple of pictures here now from a segment which is called Informal Transit. It's between the classic form of transit, like a tube train, and a taxi. So it's normally a mid-size kind of bus. It's called a microbus or a minibus or dolmuş or jitney, varying from city to city. But what they all share is they are between these two segments I just mentioned. Informal, that's why it's called this way. You have like 10, 50 people sitting on board, and it's all based on the knowledge of the drivers. So the routes are not really set. The drivers know that on a Friday afternoon, for example, they have to go some certain route. They talk on walkie-talkies, you know, to find out where some traffic jam is or some other stuff. So it looks like a chaotic system, but in fact it's very intelligent. However, it's all analog still. There's no digital involvement in these kind of systems. You pay cash, you wait on the street, you have to wave to the driver, and you might be lucky and he sees you, you might be unlucky and he leaves you behind. So it's a system that is already in a niche that's particularly interesting, however, no digital involvement. So when you want to bring that to the next level, of course what you need to have is data. You have to understand how a city works, and you have to have all these kind of information that you need to understand, for example, how a minibus is operated. Now, in fact, if you look at the big cities in the world, like the cities with more than 1 million people living in, you find out that in many cities of the world there is no data available. So other than here in Hamburg, where you have like the HVV, the Public Transport Authority, they know all the timetables and the schedules, and you just plug into an API and you know a lot of stuff. In a city like Mexico City, of course, something like that doesn't exist. So the question is, how do you get this data to understand what's going on in the city, to provide a platform, a system that is as intelligent as I mentioned earlier? And what we have here, for example, is a map of Santiago de Chile, one of the cities we recently launched our product in. And that is only about the situation of maps, digital maps. So the question, do we know the streets in a city? And all that is red is not mapped yet. So from the very basis of navigation, you see there's lack of data in these cities. And that's why it's so interesting to involve the community. I come to that point in a second, because to fix this problem, to get to a sophisticated data set for the streets and the stops and the routes and all this kind of grid, you need to have data in a proper way, and that's why you need to involve the people to get this data. And I want to show you what we are doing in this regard. So we are a startup company. I'd like to draw your attention rather to the civic tech in the headline. Civic means, which is not so used in Europe, it's a startup that involves really the community. You know, we rely on the community and we do something for the community. It's not a pro bono project. It's a company. It's a business, of course, but it's around the civic community. And it's a tech startup, so we are not about m-commerce or e-commerce. You know, we really want to build a technology that is capable of providing something like mass transit on demand. We are a company with $5 million of funding, so by now we are going globally at the moment, really to emerging markets, because as I said, that's where the big game takes part. And what we are doing right now is we have an app in the App Store, iOS and Android, which integrates all various modes of transportation. Both the classic transportation, like a tube and a bus and stuff like that, as much as on-demand transit options like Uber or Drive Now, Car2Go, caller bikes, all this kind of modern stuff. So as I mentioned, we believe, oh, this screen goes off anyway. We believe that there's going to be a niche between a taxi and a classic public transportation, and that's why we're already integrating all the stuff that's out there to be in a position to understand how a city works. We already see all the patterns of people going around in Hamburg as much as in Mexico City. So if you think of it from the end game, that you want to be a platform that provides in the end the insights to tell a bus, you better go on a Friday night this route because it's good in terms of the traffic jam. People are actually waiting along this route, this kind of stuff. You first have to understand what's going on in a city. You cannot just launch it like this. So that's why we decided, you know, to bring all the insights first in the platform by the application we have, which is a nice product to use. And then in the second step, bring it back to the people and launch operating vehicles based on the insights we have. So Ellie is in the App Store. Works in Hamburg as nicely as in London and in many other European cities. And as I said, just launched in some emerging markets. Apple Watch works too. That's not so interesting. But what's interesting is that, for example, that is Istanbul. And what you see here with the blue lines is a grid of the minibus system operating around Istanbul. It's very relevant for the market in Istanbul. It's some 30% of all public transit in Istanbul takes place via minibuses, and no digital data is available on that. So what we did earlier this year was we hired a group of 20 students together with a specific tracking app, and they went around with the minibuses all weekends, you know, 24/7 more or less, to get this data. So we found out how the minibus system in Istanbul works. So we involved the community, the people who normally, even the Istanbul residents, they do not know exactly what's going on, where they exactly have to take a minibus from one area to the other. So by this first time, we have a grid of the information on minibuses in Istanbul. Google doesn't have it with Google Maps, Nokia doesn't have it with Nokia here, so all the leading players, they lack of doing it because Google doesn't have a strong community to provide data with, and that's a chance, I guess, for many startup companies to engage the community to do something which is very relevant. For example, sourcing data like this. This is a map of Mexico City, a screenshot from one route we have recently mapped. So it's the same in Mexico City. It's one of the most complicated cities in the world, transport-wise. And when we launched a couple of weeks ago, I told you that, and we have to say we underestimated the complexity. It's really kind of a mess. But at the same time, you see that you can do a bigger difference, of course. That's so tempting from an entrepreneur side. You know, when you go into something which is really broken and you make it just a little better, you have more rewards than when you try to fix something in a city like Berlin, where people are already freaking out when the S-Bahn is 2 minutes late. So that's why it's so rewarding to go into these markets and to work on these problems, I have to say. So what you see here is, I hope you can see that there is a gray line, gestrichelt in German, where a minibus goes from A to B. But in fact, the A and the B, these are two crowdsourced stops that were given us by commuters. We didn't hire people in Mexico City. That's not happening by the community who just by itself wants to improve the product. And what we now do is we develop some technology that can predict if we have a couple of stops on a route that can learn actually from the experience we already have where the route exactly will go through. So we try to have a machine learning kind of thing to get faster results in terms of establishing the grid. And of course not the grid is only relevant. As I told you earlier, the minibuses go this way and that way, so it has to be very actual, it has to be very real time. So you have to have a constant flow on information and a platform that can very soon, if for example you see it here, if the bus goes this way rather than that way, that something is happening. Because if you're waiting at this corner, you want to know if a bus comes here or there. So that's why it's important to have it very up to date. A second thing, which is not here on the map, but I'd like to mention it anyway, is safety. So in cities like Mexico City, we can discuss long if the public transit system is comfortable or not. But the problem that is really critical is safety. So at night, when you think of a typical situation, a student party, 2 o'clock in the morning, how do you get home as a student? And normally you would love to take public transit. But it's not safe, or at least you do not know if it's safe. So you'd like to find out. And that's why we see that there's a huge demand by the community to find out, is a mode of transportation safe or not? Can I do this or not? So we engage now the community a lot to provide us information on safety. On safety both, of course, in terms of is the driver really a good driver or bad driver, but more importantly, really is it a safe area or not? Or can I engage the community to feel safer? So what you might know from Uber is that they have this kind of feature that you can share your location and someone else can follow you on the way home. So you enter Uber in Delhi, let's say, and you don't feel that safe, so you send your location to some friends, or at least someone can follow you on the map. And that's something that you can apply to public transit too. You're coming home from the student's party, you send your boyfriend, honey, I'm entering the bus 123 at the moment, and then your boyfriend can follow you, which makes you at least a little safer because you share your location. At the same time, you can of course do that with the community. You can share to the community, hey, I'm here now, and if something goes wrong, you can have some kind of emergency button to let others know and to have the community help you. So which might look like something which has nothing to do with core transportation in the beginning, is something which is very relevant for doing like this, for tracking information on how a transport system actually works. Because one thing is clear, if you share your location and the information that you entered the bus 123 with your boyfriend, and you are being followed on the way home, by this we of course see where the bus 123 goes on which route, and if it's in time or not. So we gain some information which is valuable for running the transport system by providing something else which is in this regard safety. So we feel that there is a lot of stuff where you can emotionalize public transport. And that's my final remark in the end. If you look at public transportation itself, it's not an emotional topic, right? Taking a tube, is that emotional? I would say no. But the city itself is very emotional. There are emotional experiences everywhere. And when you link the two, actually that makes it interesting to engage the community once again, to help transportation to deal with all the challenges I have mentioned earlier, and to put the people into a position that they see I make a difference. I have some impact in the city, and it doesn't take much. If you look at the safety I just mentioned, it doesn't take much, to make it a little safer. Yeah, so we are going internationally. I already mentioned that. Let me have a look at the time. Looks pretty fine. This is our environment. So what we do is we have a big platform that we provide to others too. This is one use case where we provide information to Lufthansa, which by this carries people to the airport. And if you think that through, that means at the moment it's very convenient to let you know my flight goes at 5 o'clock, I have to be there at 4, what time do I have to leave in the city? So we connect flight and public transit information. But if you think again at the end game that we have in mind, allocating transportation in a way that people get smoothly to the airport, an application, for example, that tells people what time to go and which transportation to use, that can make it much more efficiently than is happening at the moment, which is a little random, of course. So there are so many use cases. That's why I believe we are living in very exciting times, and I can only underline what the other guys have mentioned earlier today. There is this game change going on. I'm totally convinced that in 10 years from now, the cities will look differently, the public transportation system will look differently, but I feel that's going to be in a good way, not in a bad way. I don't see these cities, full of traffic jam and pollution and this kind of stuff. I feel that we have at the same time all the opportunities, and I'm very thrilled, I have to say, to be part of that. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tom.